I'm going to talk about the secret sauce that lies behind all the large language models. I'm going to explain in the process what makes the large language models actually large. It all goes down to a particular paper that was published in 2017, and the name of the paper will explain why I'm wearing this Beatles t-shirt. In the first part of the video that I produced earlier, I talked about parts of the secret sauce of ChatGPT, a large language model, namely the generative part of the model. So I explained what that generative means. Essentially, it means you observe certain thing on a lower dimensional vector space, and then you blow it up to a higher dimensional vector space with the hope that you have retained all the essential elements so that there is no loss of information visible. The key word here is visible. Now, all these large language models up until 2017 followed a rather relatively simple path. They addressed a simple question, and that is the following. Consider a sequence x1, x2, xn, where n is the dimension of the vector. However, the value of n is variable, which is a key thing to remember. So the large language models usually took the following form. If you know x1, x2 up until xt minus 1, can you predict xt with high degree of confidence? So that was it. That was the main flow of the model. And that's what all the models aimed to do. The idea again is to have x1, x2, xt minus 1, and you want to predict xt with some degree of confidence, with certain probability. Now, do we take all the x1, x2, xt minus 1 up to xt in order to update to xt plus 1? That's the key question. And when you do that, it is known as the recurrent neural network model. So recurrent in the sense that you take into account all of the previous observations in order to predict what the next observation is going to look like. So for example, in your cell phone or mobile phone, you type in I am a and leave it a blank. See what it says. Now, erase the whole thing again and start all over again. Again, you type in I am a and see what it says. A good likelihood that the second try is not going to offer you suggestion as you did in the first one. Why is that? Because I am a, it could have many different reasons, and nothing is very obvious as to what the next word is or should be. So it offers a big menu, and then when you're not satisfied, you try the whole thing again, then it gives you a different menu. That tells us that it does not have high degree of confidence as to what you really want. So this whole scheme of thing works reasonably well when you have your n, the total number of words that you are going to have, or end of the sentence as sometimes called. If that is a small number, then it works reasonably well. Now, if that reminds you of one kind of statistical model, you are right. This is essentially what we are trying to do, is to predict what happens on to the state at n plus 1 when you have up until n information. So Markov model typically says that you don't have to remember whatever happened in all the previous states of the world. The only thing that you need is information about what happened in the previous state of the world, the n minus 1, in this case nth state, in order to predict n plus 1. And this is the key thing about Markov model. And a hidden Markov model is when you are doing the same thing, but you're talking about a separate variable y based on something that you have information on, which is not y, but x variable. So all of this becomes important when you are talking about a language model. It fills in the gap. That would be equivalent to a Markov model where it does not require any information other than the last state, or in this case, the last word. Similarly, a hidden Markov model is applicable when you have a translation problem where you are observing something in one language, but you're trying to predict something else in a different language. Love is all you need. Now, the breakthrough paper for this whole business of predicting the next word came with 2017 paper by Vaswani and others, all working in Google. There were a couple of other academics in it too. And this is the reference of the paper. The paper is called Attention is All You Need. Of course, this is a takeoff on the old classic from the Beatles called All You Need Is Love, and Love Is All You Need. So that's how the refrain goes for that song. And this explains why I am wearing that Beatles t-shirt in the beginning of this presentation. Let me give you a very simple example that will illustrate this whole business in more concrete terms. You have in English written a sentence and it says, "This dog is white." And you want to translate that into different languages. I have put down here the second sentence in Spanish. Este perro es blanco. It's what we would normally say to convey the same meaning as this dog is white. However, the order in which these words occur, this is equal to este, dog is perro, that part is fine, is s, white is blanco. So this is all pretty much one-to-one correspondence you can see in this translation or in this word that I'm trying to express. However, if you go to Hindi, which comes in the third line, it says ye kutta safed hai. So ye kutta is this dog is fine. Safed means white in Hindi, but that's the third word it comes in the sequence. So if you're trying to predict everything based on the last few words, it's not quite going to work. It gets worse. On the fourth line in Bengali, it says ei kukurti shada. There are exactly 3 words other than 4 words in the other 3 languages that I have above, where the attribute to the dog is kukurti, which sort of says is in Bengali. And Shada is white, and it comes at the end. That part is fine. The whole point is that now we have a three-word sentence which substitute the 4-word sentences in the previous 3 languages. So what did Vaswani et al. Do with the original network that we used to model these kinds of things in? So what they did was they tweaked the distance between words with a transformation. Usually the transformation is tan h, and then rescaled in certain way so that the more distant word became even more distant. So this is why they call it the transformer model. The transformer encodes, there are 2 transformers. One is the transformer encoder, where you transfer these things into a hidden set of layers, and then there's a transformer decoder. So the input space produces an encoder, and output space is where the decoder brings you to the final outcome. And the second insight of the Vaswani paper is that the differentiation between the decoder part from the encoder part, and the attention function that applies to the encoder part is very different from the function that applies to the decoder part. I'll explain that in a second. So when you are applying a model of neural network, typically you have a set of encoders, and different transformers are used for the encoding part, and a different set of transformations are used for the decoding part. Here, what we do is, when you do the transformer decoder, you use the future masking at each application of self-attention. So what does that mean? That means there is information constraint put in at the decoder level. In other words, when you apply, roughly speaking, when you have the encoder part, each layer has a different encoder, whereas at the decoder part, you apply in all the layers exactly the same decoder. And intuition of behind that would be, you do not allow any cheating by looking at the future, because future is what the prediction is for the translated part, if you like. So what exactly did the Vaswani paper do? Essentially, it transformed lower dimensional data to a higher dimensional result by the generated function G that we've seen in the previous presentation. So recall what that G does. It takes a lower dimensional vector or a series of vectors and transforms that into a higher dimensional vector or vectors without losing the essence of the input variable in such a way that it can handle a much bigger output space to tell you that what you have done in the process of blowing it up have not lost the fidelity of your original signal. First widespread use of that was used by Google itself, not surprisingly. It was used for the project, what they call the BERT project. And it shows up when you do a Google search, when you see a snippet with your each reply. So it picks up certain words around the word or sequence of words that you are searching for, and in order to do that, or in the process of doing that, it actually uses the technique that we have been discussing here. Let me give you one concrete example. Here I did a concrete search for the word within quotes using Google. Attention is all you need. And this is the paper that we have been discussing, the Vaswani et al. Paper. So the first thing that it produces when I do that search is the paper itself. And not only it shows the title of the paper, then it shows us a bit of the abstract to tell us a little bit more about what kind of thing that it picks up. So notice that here it actually did all of that within a fraction of a second and produced over 1 million results and presented it to me. So this is an impressive feat that Google is able to do. 1 million search of over 1 million documents and produce this result. Obviously, Google is not searching those 1 million documents in different places. Google has already cataloged them, and in its database, all of these things already appear. So Google gives you that based on its own cloud data, not going around all over the place trying to pick them out one at a time, which will take a hell of a lot longer than 0.67 seconds. So that's essentially what Google does in its BERT project. Now, Google's next step is the BARD project, which is another ChatGPT style model, which it hopes to be much, much wider and much, much better than ChatGPT itself. So the punchline of all of this is that you are looking for an algorithm that makes up for the lack of data. And that's how you're able to blow up your lower dimensional vector into a higher dimensional vector without people noticing that there has been any loss of fidelity. Now, how exactly or why exactly it works is we really do not know, because we do not see the hidden layers in any neural network models. So most people hope that there are some underlying structures that we do not see obviously when we do a visual inspection of a picture or of a sequence of words in the lower dimension that we can easily decipher, and presumably the neural network is picking up that structure. Alternatively, it is possible that this algorithm or these algorithms are producing biases that we don't understand and is skewing the result in such a way that does not retain the fidelity of the original base and produces something totally biased. To see why that could be a problem, recall what we said about the white Obama problem. That was an example of how these kinds of algorithms can produce these sorts of biases. So the summary of all of that is that we really do not know whether the algorithm is producing some kind of skewed model or the algorithm is actually picking up some lower dimensional structure that we do not obviously see. Now, it is entirely possible that we have both of these things happening simultaneously, and what we are getting is a mixture of the two. Whether what exactly is happening underlying all of this is not clear at the moment at all. I hope you have seen my Secret Sauce of ChatGPT Part 1. This was Secret Sauce of ChatGPT Part 2. I have linked the YouTube video in my website. You go to youtube.com/tapansinha. That's where all of this is. And you can also go and look at my site in Google that has these kinds of information and a whole bunch of other things that you can look at. I encourage you to look at all of those things, and I'm going to be producing some more of these kinds of artificial neural network models and what they do and how they function, along with a bunch of stuff about yoga.